Hello and welcome to Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. I'm your host, CJ Baumgartner. Pitchers and catchers have reported to spring training, and as I'm recording this podcast, I believe today's the day that hitters report as well. And the first full squad workout will begin on Monday the 20th. Somewhere around there, and we're off into full spring workouts this coming Saturday, the 25th. The Twins have some split squad games against the Rays and the Orioles, and we're off into the full-fledged spring training. And boy, am I glad to have Twins baseball sort of here. There's always those moments you're like, well, first day they report, baseball's back. And then you're like, well, not really. And then you wait another week and you're like, well, they play spring training games. Now baseball is back. And then you wait a few more weeks and then you're like, well, now once the season officially starts, then Twins baseball is actually back. And whatever, it's fun to be talking about baseball in the middle of February. There's a giant winter storm warning across Minnesota, at least for my area right now in central Minnesota. So you know what? I think it's okay that we start to think a little bit of baseball and maybe even wish that I could be down in Fort Myers and be having fun down there with the Twins, getting to play ball. And I didn't check the weather, but I assume it's like sunny and 70. But anyway, so the Twins are reporting and full squad workouts are happening tomorrow and through next week and all the like. So I think just with this general excitement, it seems to me that there is a general excitement for Twins baseball this season. And I know there was last year, especially at the beginning with Carlos Correa coming here, but I think it was a little tempered because there was the lockout and the Twins were coming off a very disappointing year. There was a lot of new makeup and they traded Taylor Rogers right before the start of the season. So it was just kind of off. There were some very positive things like Correa, and then there were some just things that were off, like the lockout and just everything that went associated with that. You kind of forgot about baseball, and then all of a sudden it got thrown right back in your face. And it's like, hey, here's baseball. So they're trying to care about that and to trying to do all that stuff. But now the Twins have had a full off season to care. And I know last season ended bitterly, and that they lost Gio Urshela, Luis Ariz, some very fan favorites on this team. But there is a lot of excitement for Twins baseball. Carlos Correa coming back really flipped the script on this offseason, and you can just tell that him coming back really won the offseason for them and the fan base. I mean, I know there's always the negative Nancy's on Facebook and Twitter and whatever that say, got to keep him healthy, got to do this, got to do that. But he's still here, and the Twins still have an all-star caliber shortstop. You know my thoughts on Carlos Correa. Go back and listen to past episodes on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, also our YouTube page. A lot of great stuff happening on that front. And I think that there's just been a generalized excitement for the Twins because not only that, they added Christian Vazquez in the offseason. Alex Kirilloff hopefully will get a lot of innings. Jose Miranda was a nice little breakout rookie. And then there's guys like Royce Lewis who are going to come back, hopefully for the second half of the season. Maybe that doesn't add to the general excitement right away, but I still think that there is a lot to be excited about for Twins baseball. And here's how I think, and maybe this is a dumb way to measure it, but I think it's true. There's been a lot of good turnout for this podcast in the last few weeks, really ever since the Carlos Correa signing. I mean, just the numbers on the podcast have increased, as have increased for other Twins podcasts around. I mean, Gleeman and the Geek, I think their podcast has jumped up as well. And I'm sure plenty of other Twins related content has jumped up because Carlos Correa's back, and then you're just more excited. Now the next thing they do, and then they go get a starting pitcher in Pablo Lopez, and I know they traded Ariz to get Lopez, but they still got a very nice starting pitcher, and who is this guy, and what can they do? And I think for as many Twins fans as there are upset about losing Ariz, there still is a lot of excitement over who is Pablo Lopez and what can he bring to the Twins. And this guy threw 180 innings last year. Can he do that for the Twins and everything? And I also think, so my other job, I work in radio as my main job, and I was talking to the sales staff, one guy on the sales staff, and he said, man, the Twins ads are selling. Like they are just going. Like you don't even have to walk in and they're like, hey, I want to a business. And they are like, hey, man, I want to make sure that we are advertising for a Twins game. And they didn't have that last year, partially because of the lockout. So again, there was a lot of uncertainty, but still a positive sign that people are excited about Twins baseball and about this year's Twins team. And I think that that's warranted. I think the Twins have had about as good of an offseason as you could have planned. They bolstered the starting rotation by bringing in Pablo Lopez. Kenta Maeda is coming back. So you have that aspect. You also have catching, which you upgraded with Vazquez. Carlos Correa coming back is huge for this team. So when you add in those things, it wasn't like it seems a lot more busier than it was, because there was the adding Joey Gallo, adding Michael Taylor, there's a few things that are kind of sprinkled in that process, but it's been such a long offseason. There's been so many twists and turns that you almost forget that they re-signed Emilio Pagan. But outside of that, there have been a lot of moves that I've really liked throughout this offseason, and I think the Twins have put themselves in a really good position. I maybe thought one more reliever to throw into the bullpen mix, maybe another right-handed hitter, like a true hitter. I know Michael A. Taylor's a righty, but known for his glove more than his bat, like a true right-handed power guy to kind of maybe take that first base DH spot if Gallo and or Kirilloff can't quite handle that spot and you don't want to have to push Miranda over there. But that's like little nitpicks. I think re-signing Carlos Correa was objective number one, and getting Pablo Lopez was objective number two. And they did both of those things. And now the Twins are set up, and here we go. It's spring training time. And as of spring training, and as we've been getting ready for spring training, we've been breaking down some of the position groups. We've gotten to starting pitchers. We've gotten through the relief pitchers. And then last time we talked about the first baseman, and we are going to get to catcher in just a few minutes. But there's one thing that I do want to talk about first, and that are some rule changes that have gone on across baseball. So the first rule change that was enacted, I think Tuesday or Wednesday, might have been maybe Wednesday was the official day that it was announced. The new rule change in baseball, there's two of them, but the first one goes towards we'll talk about the one with the ghost runner, the zombie runner, the extra runner, the Manfred man. There's a whole bunch of things you can call it. I just call it Little League because, to be honest, come on, what are we doing here? I think just on a pure gut level, I understand the argument for, hey man, this does speed up the game. It does create some urgency. Like most extra inning games don't go past 13 innings now. The amount of 18 inning marathons goes down. At the same time, how much were they happening that it really was a problem? And is 13 innings still ideal? As kind of that cap, I don't know. I get it. A team's got to win in 9 innings. And if you can't win, well then, it's a toss-up. You have to play more. You have to play extra. It's the whole thing of don't complain about losing in overtime because you should just won in regulation. Kind of deal with the extra inning rule. I get all of the arguments, and I'm not saying that they're inherently wrong. I just don't like them. I think that's where I stand on this. The extra inning rule with a runner on base really screwed the Twins over in 2021. In 2020, or in 2022 rather, it didn't really impact anything at all. There wasn't too much change to that. But so it's a little anecdotal when people say the Twins always get gypped on the extra inning rule, partially, but whatever. Everybody's got to play with that same set of circumstances. I think really my general rule is fine. You want to keep the runner on second base in the extra innings. We can do that, but give the 10th inning. Can the 10th inning be that spot? Can it be where we say, all right, this is a normal inning, no runners on base to start the innings. And then once you get to the 11th, then it's okay, we give you one more chance and now let's move on. I think that's fair because then it causes some teams to go okay, if we get that guy on, we really got to do something here because we want to be able to score a run and get ahead while we come up without the team having the leadoff runner in scoring position. I think that's something I'd be up for, but then again, maybe it's just a wash anyways. I don't know. I don't like the rule. I don't like it as a gut rule for Major League Baseball players. I get the argument of everybody likes the idea of marathon games, but nobody actually really likes to watch it. I mean, everybody remembers the marathon inning game, how many innings, I can't remember how long was that Houston Astros Seattle Mariner 0-0 duel and in the playoffs, and there was the long home run by Yordan Alvarez to end it, or one of those two things. I don't know. I can't remember quite how long it is, but the point is that it was a marathon game and it was so fun. It was so dynamic. But like, there's also a point when you get to like the 13th inning where you're like, hey man, somebody just score. Just can we end this game? And that's a postseason game. When you get to a game in June on a Wednesday afternoon and it's getting to like 15 innings and one team's got a plane to catch and they got to go cross country to play a series the next day, I get the sentiment of, you know, guys being like, just finish the game and let's go, like this, whatever. So I understand the argument for the extra inning rule staying, but I personally don't like it and don't think it really enhances the product that much. But I guess it really doesn't degrade the product maybe as much as, you know, maybe as much as a baseball traditionalist or somebody who at least leans more into that category like me would call it. But anyway, the other new rule, which I am more of a fan of, is the new rule about position players pitching. So I want to make sure I get this rule right and make sure that I quote the thing properly on how it works and how everything goes. So this is according to Jesse Rogers of ESPN, which says the competition committee voted to unanimously allow position players to pitch only in extra innings in the 9th inning when a team is up by 10 or more runs, or any time when the trailing team is down by 8 or more. So essentially, it gets rid of teams that are losing by 4 runs in the 8th inning, and they just throw up the white flag and say, you know what? We're going to bring in old Nick Gordon to pitch. Here comes Williams Astudillo with his 64-mile-an-hour eephus. Now, look, position players pitching is really fun, and if you follow Cut 4 on Twitter, they are really good about anytime a position player shows up to pitch. There's the weird characters with the parentheses and the colons, and they just got the position player pitching. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'm sorry for that little dance. But you know, that's it was a fun novelty. And it was kind of fun to see Nick Gordon and like, hey, can this guy come into pitch? Or, hey, Albert Pujols is coming into pitch. Isn't this kind of funny? He's like 42 years old. Look at this old guy. Can he strike anybody out? Or you have like Freddie Freeman and Anthony Rizzo going back and forth. I mean, there are some fun things about it. But again, the novelty of it wore off really thin because teams really overused it. And that, I think, is the thing in baseball that's requiring. I don't like the league stepping in and having to meddle all the time in the rule book. I don't. I think the league should generally get a chance to police itself. But the only problem is that they failed at every chance a lot of chances to police themselves when, you know, it's like, hey guys, like we're going to ban the shift if you don't watch out. And teams just kept shifting. And then they're like, all right, fine. Now there's no rule in place for the new shift. And we'll get to that in a second. But teams could technically, with this new shift rule, there's no rule about outfielders shifting. So you technically could only have 2 outfielders in their primary outfield spots. And let's say that you bring the left fielder all the way over to right field to play where that second baseman used to play in shallow right field. You could do that. But I think the league has also said, if you try it, just know that we could very easily put in a rule to stop that. So again, the teams have policed themselves very poorly. And that's why you, like, especially with pace of play, like, come on, guys, can you speed up the game at all? And no team wants to do that. Hey, guys, could you maybe do this? Could you maybe do that? And no teams have really been willing to do that this far. And especially with position players pitching, because since Major League Baseball is like you can only have 13 pitchers on the roster, it just means that teams are like, well, fine, we're going to lose this game anyway. So why would I bring my actual relief pitcher out here in a game we're going to lose when I could save him for tomorrow in a game we might have a chance of winning? So I'm going to bring this guy in who's maybe going to get drilled for 4 different home runs, but you're going to lose anyways. So let's just be done with it. The only problem is there. Remember the Twins and White Sox game a couple years ago where the Twins brought in a position player to pitch and then absolutely got rocked. I can't remember if it was Astudillo. I can't remember if it was somebody else, but they brought that in. And then the Twins were all like, whoa, what do they think they're doing? Or maybe it was the other way around. Anyway, La Russa talking about pimping home runs, and there was a bit of a back and forth, and it's just more of like, you wave the white flag. When you bring a position player into pitch, you admit that you're going to lose this game. And the other team, what are they supposed to do? Bunt it? What are they supposed to do? And then even then, it'd be like, oh, well, way to bunt in a game where you're up by a bunch or losing by a bunch. Like, the unwritten rules crowd, again, doing a terrible job of policing itself, causing these rule changes. So position players pitching is a fun novelty, and it still is going to be around, but we're going to see it a lot less. And I think that's good over, maybe not a lot less. I don't know quite if it's going to reduce it altogether, but it's just some it's some light guardrails. And I think that's fine. As much as I don't like Major League Baseball having to meddle with the product all the time, I do understand where they're coming from in some of these rules. And I might not agree with every rule change and agree with the method, but I do get the generalized point of like, you need to do something. Now, I think doing something for the sake of doing something isn't great, but it's got like, you know, people say this all the time with anything, just do something. We just need to do something. I just need to do something to show that I care and I want it to change. But you actually have to have very good policies in place to actually effectuate the change you want. And who knows if some of these new rule changes are going to quite get there. Like, remember when they talked about like the ball 4 for an intentional walk, you just hold up 4 fingers. There are a bunch of people who are like, this is going to really improve pace. And you have a bunch of people like, baseball will never recover from this. Like, don't you remember the one time every 5 years when the ball gets to the backstop or something? I don't know. You know, the ball gets to the backstop on a intentional walk, or when somebody swings at it and drills it into center field or whatever. That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. And really, they got rid of it and nobody noticed. So again, that's the thing with some of these rule changes. You just gotta give it time, because even though it didn't really change baseball, it also didn't, that's the thing, it didn't really speed anything up either. The games weren't all of a sudden getting a lot of things shaved off. So we'll see what happens. So that's our look at the rule changes. We've talked a little bit about some of the last ones. The one more thing, we'll get to the shift here, and that is basically, so it's not a shift ban, as it's been explained by other people before, and I think it's a good way of saying it. It's not a shift ban, but it's more of a shift regulation. And the shift isn't gone, but it's just very heavily restricted. So you can't bring the shortstop all the way over to second base. So basically, it's split into what they call pizzas, I think, or like pieces. And they just like, this is your piece if you're the third baseman. This is where you're allowed to go. This is where the shortstop's allowed to go. This is where the second baseman's allowed to go, and whatnot. And another thing too is players cannot get a running start towards another one. So you can't have the shortstop theoretically be playing right up until the line where he can go, and then as soon as the pitcher starts his windup, like start running over to shallow right field to play the spot. That will be banned. It is banned. But players can still move around a little bit. It's not like they have to stay in the exact same spot right before every pitch. There is a little bit of leeway there. You're still going to see teams shifting. It just won't be as aggressive as normal. So you'll still see Carlos Correa playing more towards the second base bag, and then maybe more towards the hole at shortstop. But teams were always doing that before, and that's baseball. So it's not like players have to keep their feet glued before the pitch, but it's just restricting the very aggressive shifts where the third baseman is playing on the second base bag. Those kind of things with baseball. And again, I don't like, as I've said before, I don't like baseball getting their hands on everything, but at the same time, I do understand where it's coming from, and I think teams have done a really bad job of policing it, because teams really do believe it gives them an advantage, and if a team believes that it's giving them an advantage, then why in the world would they stop doing it? And nobody wanted to be the one to say, well, the league really wants us to stop shifting so much, so we'll be the good soldier and do it and put ourselves in a worse position to win. Nobody's going to do that. So that's why the league had to step in. All right. Well, now that we've talked about that, I think we can move on into our discussion of the first baseman. And I think we can, or the catchers, excuse me. And I think we can get into that discussion. So let's talk about the catchers. Let's take a look at them. First of all, we got Christian Vazquez. Played for the Red Sox, won a World Series in 2018, then got traded over last August to the Houston Astros and won a World Series with them. If you look at Christian Vazquez, he's an average hitting catcher, at his peak above average, but he's not this, oh my gosh, like what a great hitting catcher. He's very respectable at the position, which again, we look at catching numbers and they're almost never good at hitting. It's why Joe Mauer being so good as a catcher was so special. But Christian Vazquez last year had 274 average, 315 on base, and a 399 slugging. So you put that together, that's what, like a 714 OPS for a catcher. Fine. You can live with that. Had 9 home runs, 52 RBIs. If you look at his weighted runs created, plus it was a 99. And I think 100 is about league average. So again, slightly below average last season, but a fine hitter. Zips projects him to take a bit of a step back. So Zips is Fangraph's way of deciding and projecting how good a player will do in the upcoming season. They expect him to take a bit of a step back offensively, but we'll kind of see, because he did with his numbers last year, at least in the slash line, have an above average year by his hitting standards. He is a guy that whiffs on a lot of pitches. So he's a guy, he swings and misses a lot. And again, just not overall, like he's not a Mitch Garver in 2019. He's not a whatever, just that's what he's not. Adley Rutschman. He's not, prime Joe Mauer, but defense is the main reason that he's here. The Twins signed him to a 3-year, $30 million contract. When you look at his pop time, it's in the 72nd percentile, which is in a very nice, respectable spot. Now, pop time is the amount of time it takes you to get out of your stance and to get into a throwing position, have that ball get sent down to second base. So an above average spot. He's also an above average framer. You look at his defensive runs saved. For last year, he had 11 defensive runs saved. Best framing is the upper part of the zone, really good at bringing those high fastballs back down. Somebody like Joe Ryan, Sonny Gray could really take advantage of that. Tyler Mahle, especially some of those guys who like to throw higher in the zone in that upper third part of the plate. His best defensive attribute, though, probably is neutralizing the running game for Christian Vazquez. He has a very good arm. He threw out 19 runners last season on 70 attempts, one of the most in baseball last season in terms of guys caught stealing. So Christian Vazquez, very good at doing that. One of the top guys over the last 5 years in throwing guys out on the base paths. So a very effective catcher in terms of stopping the running game, which is going to be very important because of the new pitch clock rule that we talked about last week that is going to incentivize people to steal bases. And so with that going up, that's not going to mean everybody's going to be stealing bases, but the teams, again, have inclined less of stealing bases. Now there's going to be incentive to steal more bases, and the Twins are counteracting that by having Vazquez on behind the plate to catch. He's a veteran when you look at Christian Vazquez, 32 years old, 8 seasons of Major League Baseball experience, 2 World Series rings. The biggest question for Christian Vazquez is, one, can he keep his bat going at a average to above average clip for a catcher? And 2, how will the running game be? But then also 3 is and maybe this is the most important one, is what is that split going to look like with him and Ryan Jeffers? Because Ryan Jeffers obviously now is going to be relegated down to the 1B catching role. Now, if you look at the Twins, especially ever since Derek Falvey and Thad Levine have been in charge, like to have catcher 1A and 1B. There's no Joe Mauer to Mike Redmond. There's no A to C-. There's more of a B+ to C+ kind of range. They like to kind of go back and forth and kind of have 2 guys. You look at it with Jason Castro and Mitch Garver. You look at it with Mitch Garver and Ryan Jeffers. You look at it last season with Ryan Jeffers and Gary Sanchez, 2 guys who neither one really became the established starter, but both of them got a ton of time to where it really didn't matter. There was no I'm the bona fide starter. It was just whoever is kind of playing better, or whoever has a specific pitcher that likes to throw to them, or whoever, matchups, whatever, is who's getting the ball and who's getting the glove behind the plate that day. I think it'll be somewhere 60-30. I'm just kind of guessing with that. With what they do with Jeffers and Vazquez, but Vazquez doesn't sign this contract. And I don't know how true these reports were back in December when he was signed, but the Twins don't go and sign Vazquez, and Vazquez doesn't sign with the Twins if he doesn't think he's getting a majority of the starts. So it's not going to be 50-50. Thinking 70-30 might be where we end up seeing that clip. Maybe 65-35, somewhere in that range, where they're getting enough to where they're not necessarily a backup, but one guy is clearly getting more starts than the other. And that's obviously going to be Vazquez. And Vazquez is going to want to come here to play. The Twins are giving him $10 million a year at age 32 for 3 years. So I think it makes sense for both sides. But for Ryan Jeffers, this becomes interesting. His defensive framing abilities in the 64th percentile and a frame rate of 3.3. So again, a little bit higher than Vazquez. Jeffers has had issues throwing out runners. That's really been the bugaboo of his career. He's still only thrown out 7 runners last year in 31 attempts and 22 in his entire career. And again, that's part of the reason of just the catching stance and the way the Twins have liked to coach their catchers. And back in the day when nobody really stole bases, it was like, hey man, you can get, especially with Mitch Garver, you can get in the wonkiest position ever. It doesn't matter, because don't worry about not being able to pop up and throw the ball over to second base, because teams aren't just going to steal. We'll take our chances. And that's how the Twins have been doing things. And now things are going to change in terms of the rule book with the pitch clock and stealing and all the rest. So it's only 3 seasons though of Jeffers. So maybe it's kind of making too much on a not enough data in terms of him throwing out runners or the lack thereof. He's a good framer basically for Jeffers, but bad in the run game. That's a good way to look at how he is as a catcher, but as a hitter, Jeffers has the ability to be a solid hitting catcher, and is really one of the reasons why the Twins felt so confident in trading Mitch Garver. Because remember, the Gary Sanchez trade still didn't happen yet, and really was no inclination that it was going to happen. It was kind of a last minute deal. So Jeffers was going to be the main catcher last season, and until he got hurt and missed most of the second half of last year, probably would have been the case. So Jeffers he's got some potential with hitting. He is in the 91 percentile in max exit velocity. His slash line, 208 average, 285 on base, 363 slugging, with 7 homers, 27 RBIs in 67 games. Of course, as we talked about, injuries took that toll. He hasn't really shown a track record of being a guy who can take a majority of at-bats and starts as the number 1 catcher, but remember, it took Mitch Garver a couple years to get that under his belt. Made his debut in 2017, back and forth in 2018, and then 2019 is really when he flourished. Ryan Jeffers had 2020 where he had some starts, had 2021, now 2022, while there was a lot of injuries there and a lot of stuff going wrong. So with Ryan Jeffers, I think time just probably is what needs to be on his side more than anything. He's still 25 years old, still has a lot of good pop when he's on with the bat, and I think you just need to give it maybe another year or two to let it season. Although the fact that the Twins brought in Vazquez on a 3-year contract, maybe they want to keep this Jeffers-Vazquez pairing, and eventually as Vazquez gets older and Jeffers gets more seasoned as a pro, that maybe that ratio starts to turn and Jeffers gets more of the starts and more of the at-bats. That could be something that happens. So that's something to watch out for. Really, with the Twins, it's those 2 guys. Those are your 2 catchers. There's a pretty considerable drop-off, and also the fact that there's no other catchers on the 40-man roster. The emergency catcher is Kyle Farmer, and so it'll be interesting if the Twins don't actually put another catcher on the 40-man roster when we get to opening day. I'd be fascinated if they don't, but there's more likely than not that there's going to be some guy on the 40-man roster as a third catcher in case one of them gets hurt, although maybe they're waiting to see if they go on the IL, then they do that, and then they call up a guy into the 40-man, and then they come off, and then they designate him for assignment. That could be the case, but I don't think Kyle Farmer is actually going to be catching games. I think it's more of an emergency catcher if they decide that Jeffers is going to DH and Vazquez is going to be behind the plate and one of them gets hurt, or they, for whatever reason, can't use both of them, or they got to substitute one out, whatever. I think that's how that would work. I don't really think Kyle Farmer is going to be getting a lot of time behind the plate. Let me put it to you that way. So they have a lot of camp catchers, and you want a lot of catchers in camp in spring training because you have a lot of pitchers that need to warm up and need bullpen sessions, and Christian Vazquez can't catch everybody all day long. So that's why they got him. They have Grayson Greiner, guy who's 30 years old, some Major League Baseball experience, nothing really doing. Chance Cisco, more of the same, a career 197 hitter. Don't believe he had a ton of at-bats, if any, at the big league level, but played a lot in St. Paul last year. Tony Walters, 7-year veteran, a left-handed hitting bat. Those are your catching options for the Twins in terms of your backups, your third catchers, hey, if one of these guys goes on the IL, this would probably be the guy that gets the big league call-up to sit on the bench for 10 days and then go back down. So let's look down the pipe and see who the Twins have in the prospect system. Ricardo Olivar, 21 years old, in single A, absolutely mashed the ball last year. 341 average, 433 on base, 580 slugging between single A and rookie ball. Very low minors, so take these numbers with a grain of salt. He's got a long way to go to get to the major leagues, but it's a very nice sign. Probably about 3 years away if we're talking when he could actually get to the big leagues, 3 or 4, before we really start to seriously consider Ricardo Olivar as a Twins catcher. But weirder things can happen. Maybe he gets to start in high A and keeps smashing and gets to double A. Then if he gets to double A at 22 and keeps going, then triple A by 23. And then we can kind of piece our way together from there. But 21 years old, still a couple more seasons to really cook and develop in the minor leagues. Chris Williams, 26 years old as a catcher. Last year in Double A and Triple A, he combined for a 246 average, 343 on base, and a 500 slugging, 28 home runs, 89 RBIs in 117 games between those two minor leagues. Does it mean, he's 26 years old, had some good numbers in the high minors. Does it mean that he's going to make his big league debut this year? Maybe, but it's not like he's going to come in and then start competing for a starting spot. You have to play very, very, very well to beat out Jeffers or Vazquez. For sure Vazquez, but Jeffers, the Twins have put a lot of faith in him over the last couple of years that I don't think they're ready to quite ditch Ryan Jeffers as a prospect and his potential big leaguer quite yet. But Chris Williams is a guy that could come in and maybe make his big league debut and play well in spurts, and we'll see what happens. But I think the fact that the Twins brought in Vazquez means that they don't really have a ton of faith in the catchers that they have in the high minors to come in and be legitimate Major League Baseball starters, which is good. The Twins then brought in a free agent in Vazquez and are paying him $10 million a year. So good transaction, good way to read the minors, really lets those guys earn their keep. And if they really are good players, they have to prove it and beat out some established good veterans. Alex Isola, the last catcher we have on this list here, 61 games in Wichita last season, hit 286 average, 377 on base, 477 slugging with 10 home runs, but not any high minors experience. So Double A, that's all he's got. And again, it was only 61 games. Righty, he's 24 years old, had some injury concerns last year, so doesn't necessarily mean that he's on his way. More time will tell. He's more like Oliver, where it's going to take a few more years for him to fully get through the minor leagues and fully flesh himself out and see if he can become a worthwhile prospect. So that's all we have in the catching department. That one's pretty quick because you really only use one catcher, maybe two, and there's really not a lot of room for depth there. Teams only have two of them. They're like the quarterbacks. They're just positions where you don't really mess around with it too much. You don't throw a ton of guys in there. It's not like a corner outfield, whatever. Those are the guys the Twins have at catcher. We talked a little bit about the rule changes, and we talked about the Twins' optimism heading into spring training. If you missed any of our previous podcasts, again, go check them out. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. This has been Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. I'm CJ Baumgartner, and look forward to the next podcast where we'll be breaking down second baseman and going through that whole list. And you guys like Jorge Polanco, Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, Austin Martin. There's a whole long line of guys to talk about, and this is where it really gets fascinating now from here on in, when you have shortstop pretty settled, but second base, third base, corner outfield, center field pretty much settled. So there's a lot of things we can still talk about with the Twins, as Major League Baseball opening day is about 40 days away, 40 or less. So let's do this thing. This has been Bombs Away. Thanks for listening.